host, Chief Executive Fish Nerd of the Fish Nerds Podcast.
And I'm Jeff Danaldson, the FN Librarian.
Welcome to the show. This show is about fish, fishing, and eating fish, and anything is fair game. And it's a good bet that you're going to want to read more and talk less after this show. Welcome to the show. Hey, Jeff, thanks for coming back on.
Glad to be here.
Yeah, so we're going to start off. Just going to quickly talk about why the show is here. We're going to do a promo for Patreon, which is how our show is funded. And right now, Jeff, our show is barely 100% funded by Patreon, which means all the costs of producing the show are paid for by the listeners.
And now, that's the way it should be.
It's a big deal. We have 0 sponsors right now. We had one for a little bit, but they went away. They might come back. but right now it's just our listeners sponsoring the show, which is great. And if you want to support the show, you can go to patreon.com/fishnerds. And we're asking all listeners to give $1 an episode. If you think an hour of entertainment is worth $1, that's what we want. And if everyone did that, not only could the show be funded, which it is, but we could actually get ahead of the game and do things like pay for travel and buy recording equipment for our correspondents. Like Jeff could use an audio recorder, and it'd be nice to be able to mail him one. Last year when we got ahead, we mailed Hugo got a recorder, which makes a difference. For getting a little better quality show. So really, the more people, the better. And we have all kinds of rewards at Patreon, and I'm behind on getting rewards out. So if you are in the queue, I am doing that. I'm going to be on vacation next week, and while I'm on vacation, I'm fulfilling those Patreon requests. So,
yeah, you want to get you some of that effing swag.
You got to get your swag. We got nice decals. You can put them on your boats or whatever you happen to put stickers on. So everything deserves a sticker.
Everything I have has a Fish Nerd sticker on it now.
It does. It's nice to be branded, but you're branded with a unique, just a small few of us have those stickers.
Right.
So, yeah.
We're an elite club.
Yeah, the effing club. So, hey, speaking of fishing, have you been fishing recently?
I have been fishing recently. I went carry fishing with Chris Stewart, also known as the Tenkara Bum.
I know that guy.
Yeah, he's a super nice guy and really knowledgeable. And so carry is a Japanese method of bait fishing for trout that's a lot like Tenkara, where you have a rod that just simply has a line tied to the end of it. But at the end of that, instead of a fly, you've got, some tippet, a split shot, a hook, and some bait. And I was using mealworms, and that was the ticket.
Mealworms are great. Now, I'm asking a question. What's it called again?
Carry.
Now, is that new?
No, it's been around for a long time in Japan, but in America,
hang on just a second.
Very new.
Well, here's how new it is. Because about 5 years ago, in 2011, Dave and I wrote an article about Tenkara fishing for our blog before we were Fish Nerds. We were catchemall.com. And we had a photo of us with a Tenkara setup with a worm on the end of it. And we got an email from the Tenkara people, I think it was your friend, saying that's not Tenkara.
Right.
But there was no other name for it, no explanation. And now I hear you guys are doing it together, and it makes me so happy.
Yeah, he's been trying to bring interest about this to the States because it's a super effective way of fishing. It's much more active than just cast out your bait and let it sit on the bottom.
That's how I fish all the time.
So you're drifting it just like you're drifting a fly. You've got little yarn markers on your line that are super sensitive strike indicators. You don't actually float them on the water like a regular strike indicator. You actually kind of suspend them above the surface of the water a little bit. And I mean, the minute a fish even breathes on your hook, you'll see it on those little yarn indicators, and you can set the hook real quick. And that is a big difference in that you don't deep hook fish.
No, they're almost nicely.
Always lip hooked. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was pretty amazed. Yeah, no swallowing the bait or anything like that. You hook them just like you would with a fly. Yep.
Now I have one of those rods that's 20 feet long. It's
I do too.
Telescoping one, and we were fishing that last summer for white perch on a pontoon boat, and it is such a blast to get a big fish on a rod like that. It's
and I actually was using a very, very light version of one of these things. It's really designed for catching very small fish, talking like 6-inch fish. And I hooked into I didn't measure it, but a pretty good sized trout. And it was a battle for the ages. I had to chase it downstream and then try to get it over into the slack water. And every time I just about get it into the slack water, it'd run back out into the current. And so we had a little disagreement for a while about that, but finally got it to the net. And that was a sense of achievement, even though it's maybe like a 12-inch trout,
It's such a blast. Anyone who hasn't done it can't understand it. But, I mean, you don't have a drag. All you have is your rod and a piece of string.
Oh, you got the rod.
Yeah, and that does all the work.
Yeah, and there's a technique to playing fish on them where if they start to straighten out your rod, that's when you're in trouble. If they get the rod bent down straight, you're in trouble. And what you need to do is flip the rod over to the side. That puts the bend back in it. Mm-hmm. And then you're flipping it over back and forth, kind of tiring the fish out. And eventually you can get them in. This had 7X tippet, so I had to be couldn't just horse it in. And so between the rod being a really soft rod and the tippet being so fine, it was a heck of a fight. And that kind of stuff just makes catching the everyday average fish into a real adventure.
Yeah, and it's just way fun. I mean, that's all it is to it. It's fun, and I think like if you're a pan fisherman, like if you love catching like crappies and bluegills and stuff like that, try that method out.
Absolutely,
you'll give up your rod and reel very quickly.
Yes, and in fact, Chris now fishes worms with a tenkara rod.
Yeah,
so
I do that too.
You did it first,
yeah.
But he actually has started using actual tenkara rods. Because they cast the line so easily, you don't need any weight, and you can just cast a worm on a hook and drift it. Can't do it in real deep water, but it turns out it's super effective. And he kind of enjoys poking at the boundaries of what's acceptable in tenkara and stuff like that. And so, I'm sure it gives him a small little feeling of joy when someone is apoplectic that he's using worms with a tenkara rod.
Well, they should. Those people who are apoplectic, they might also be vegans. They are so sold on their technique as being like special, and it's not. It's fishing like if you were 7 and you had a stick and a piece of string. It's how you would fish. It's a natural, fun, easy way to catch a whole bunch of fish. That's all it is. And they give it a fancy name so they don't feel like little kids with stickers.
I mean, there's a little bit. The casting motion is, you definitely have to practice a little bit to cast, but
Maybe.
the beauty of it is that a beginner can pick it up so fast, whereas regular, rod and reel fly casting with a heavy line, that's not something you just pick it up and immediately know how to do it. Whereas you can put a tenkara rod in somebody's hands and in 5-10 minutes have them casting effectively and catching fish, and there's just no substitute for it. Especially, I work with a scout troop, and kids want to catch fish, and there's bluegill, and I just put one of these things in their hand and put some disposable flies, which I know are going to end up in trees, probably. And just, put one of those in their hands, and they start catching bluegill, and they're happy.
Yeah, and the bluegill don't care what kind of fly you're seeing.
No, they really don't. Yeah, I mean, sometimes they get a little picky, and they won't take top water, but underwater, they're not super picky.
No, they don't care one bit. Well, that's really cool. I'm glad you're doing that, because we need more people fishing in interesting ways. I was ice fishing yesterday, and it was 80 degrees outside.
That's amazing.
Yep, I think Vinny and Vinny for sure, because I had to leave before him, were the last 2 people ice fishing in New Hampshire. There could not have been anybody else out there. It was crazy. There was still a foot of ice, and to get on the ice, you had to walk through about 8 inches of water, and then step up on the ice shelf. And as we were coming out, Vinny got out before me, and I stepped on the ice shelf, and the ice shelf broke off, and I went in past my boot. So I kind of hopped up out of the water onto the ice and dumped the water on my boot, and I went fishing. And once we got on the ice, we're on a foot of nice, solid, relative safe ice.
Yeah.
Relatively safe. Nick, who's our audio guy from the Fish Notes, he's now starting to do our mixing for our shows again. He was fishing in the same pond, but he would not go on the ice. He was fishing in the open water on the same pond, because half the pond was open, half the pond was frozen. and he didn't catch anything. But I caught my best bass the entire season, which was a cool way to end the day. And then coming off the ice, it had heated up to over 80 degrees out, and the edges of the ice where it was 6 inches deep now was at 12 inches deep. so I actually
you were getting wet.
I had to get in the water and wade off the ice, and both my boots were full of ice water. Vinny stayed out for another 25 minutes after I left, and he caught his last bass of the ice fishing season. So we ended really strong. I don't recommend anyone who doesn't know the ice or lakes really, really well to do that. But man, I'm telling you, Jeff, I don't know if you ever ice fished before, but
I have.
But getting on the ice when it's 80 degrees out, so you're out in basically a t-shirt, and it's hot. You're uncomfortably hot, and you're catching fish through the ice.
It's like when you catch that very end of the ski season where, you have these ridiculously warm days, but there's still snow, and you're like, I'm going to be there for the last day of the place being open. I'm going to ski. And that's the story of how I got the single worst sunburn I ever got in my entire life.
Yeah, well, people don't remember that the sun reflects off and is actually enhanced almost by that bright snow. So, yeah. Yeah,
it reflects off. And I had worn a jacket and got hot and took it off, and that was a mistake. And my arms got lobsterized.
Are you an easy burner?
Oh, not terribly, but, combine altitude with the reflected, stuff off the snow on just a cloudless, sunny day, and you're going to fry.
Yeah, I went fishing on Sunday. I went ice fishing in the morning, and then I went skiing in the afternoon, and it was 70 degrees out.
That's a good day.
And it was a good day. I didn't catch any fish in the morning, but I definitely got some good sun in the afternoon. But yeah, it was hot. But it's so fun to do those winter sports in the late spring and have a good time doing it. But we're not here to talk about fishing. It's a fishing podcast, but we're actually here to talk about the FN Book Club. Jeff, you are our FN librarian. And before we get into the founding fish, can you tell us about Goodreads and how people can participate in the book club?
Yeah, I created a Goodreads group, and it's called Fish Nerds Book Club.
Ah, clever.
Yes, very creative. And so I've got up the book that we're discussing right now, and then also, spoiler alert, the next book that we're going to be reading, I've added it in as well.
Oh, good.
So all you have to do is look for that on Goodreads, and I have posted a discussion thread for the books, and it's an easy way to participate.
Yeah, and we need more people participating in these. Even if you don't have time to read the whole book, if you've read part of the book or you started reading it and got bored, that's valid. Your opinion still counts. So feel free to participate. The more people who play our games, the more fun we have. And it's really about interaction with the audience, listeners. And if there's books you want us to talk about on the show, we can also include those. We don't have to just do what's Jeff's idea or my idea or whatever famous people call us. Because we make the show for you guys, our listeners, not for anybody else. So.
Absolutely open to suggestions.
Yep, but they better be good. So this month's book was The Founding Fish by John McPhee. And did you read this before you suggested it?
Yeah, I had read it again quite a long time ago, and my original interest in it is that I did not know really anything about American shad. Being from the Midwest, to me, shad means gizzard shad, which is bait. Mm-hmm. You absolutely would not want to eat one. They're slimy, nasty, stinky. They're just gross. But catfish love them, and so do a lot of other fish. But I knew nothing about American shad, and so I thought, I want to read this book, and it turned out to be a very well-written book. John McPhee, either like the way he writes or you don't.
Right.
And I think I saw some of that in some of the discussion about the book. He does tend to meander and things like that, but I find his books really interesting. He's done a lot of writing in kind of the what I would call natural history or things like that. And actually is a Pulitzer Prize winner for some of his writing about that.
Well, he certainly dives deep. And
Yes.
before we get into your thoughts and my thoughts on this book, I'm going to tell you a quick story. So about shad. Now, I've actually worked in the shad restoration program in New Hampshire, so I already know a lot about them. But what I know about fishermen is fishermen misname fish all the time. And someone came to me the other day. I saw the other day. They said, "Hey, Clay, I hear that when the shad run in the in Conway Lake ends, the salmon bite starts." And I said, "What are you talking about?" Because this is a lake that's up in New Hampshire, and there's no American shad in that water body. And so I had to do some digging to find out what was he talking about when he said shad. Do you know what he meant?
Alewives?
Nope. There's no alewives. It could have been smelled. I think more likely. Now shad. If you think about Rapala has a lure called a shad wrap.
Yeah.
I think shad to a lot of people is just whatever bait fish happens to spawn early springtime. So I think it's fall fish, golden shiners, things of that nature. People call shad. And I don't think they do it on purpose, but it's just whatever they happen. That's the name they have for it. So
yeah, well, and the reason that those shad wraps look the way they do is the gizzard shad, the threadfin shad, which are related to the American shad.
Sure.
And actually, gizzard shad can get fairly good size, but you rarely ever catch one on a hook and line.
Yeah,
and,
I have. And I've eaten them. Yeah. So.
You ate it?
Yeah.
Please tell me
it tasted like it tasted like shad.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
It wasn't bad.
Smells.
They were big.
Just based on the smell to me and the sliminess of them. Yeah. Because I've netted many gizzard shad with one of those cast nets.
Well, how big are your gizzard shad?
Well, they can grow quite big as they mature. They can get, say, like a foot plus long, but you rarely encounter those. They tend to stay deep and aren't. Only time you ever really see them in close is sort of around the spawning time. Most of the time, what you see is the kind of the young of the year, which are just a few inches long.
Yeah. Now, unless my memory is faulty, they actually mix in with the American shad run, and they could be anadromous on the East Coast. And unless I'm wrong, so if I'm wrong, please someone jump.
That might be a
let
hickory
me know.
Shad.
Maybe it's hickory shad. I saw there was another shad that ran with the American shad a few years ago. This is just like 20 years ago, and they have this long fin that kind of crosses over their back. Maybe it is a hickory shad I'm thinking of. Now I have to look it up.
Yeah, there's all kinds of different shad.
Yeah.
There's even some down, like there's a subspecies of, I think it may be hickory shad, or it's very closely related, that's endemic to Alabama, that's now kind of a little bit endangered. They're all kind of in the same kind of herring-ish type family. But the American shad really is, and the hickory shad are really the only two major game fish in the group.
Right. And now looking at the photos of the gizzard shad, it was a gizzard shad. So,
I can't believe you ate it.
Yeah, so they had that dorsal fin, and there's this long, almost like one long dorsal hair, it looks like, that goes down their back.
And I'm a pretty adventurous eater, and I've handled so many gizzard shad, and I've got that smell imprinted in my DNA that's a very popular catfish bait here. And also if you're fishing for stuff like striped bass or the hybrid striped bass, the wipers. That's a super popular bait. Oh, those are the greatest. Those are one of the greatest fish ever. But yeah, you go out and net these shad, and you end up with just this shad slime everywhere, and they smell funky, and I can't imagine eating one.
Yeah, well, there it is. So I can't. I was in my 20s. Who knows? And my memory may be faulty. So, but I'm 90% sure I ate one. But we had one of our readers has called into the Fish Nerds hotline to give his opinion. I thought let's start with his opinion before we give our opinion on this book. Okay?
That'd be great.
All right, so I'm going to play that now.
Hey, nerds, it's Rich Collins here. I'm calling in about the Shad, FN Book Club Shad book. I did have the pleasure
I'm not hearing it right now.
Listening to it on audio, and there were a few really interesting points I'd like to make. In particular, what really fascinated me was this guy that goes out and builds these, I don't know if they were fife nets or weirs or what, out of wood. It literally goes out and builds these nets made of timber, which was really interesting, and then takes them down. Fascinating way to catch fish. Secondly, it was really interesting to me that in times of war, the troops would try to strangle each other out by cutting off the food supply, which was shad. So these fish were actually a weapon in a way, or preventing the fish was a weapon, which is fascinating. I found it really interesting that this was kind of a slave food for them to go out and catch when they were, under captivity of their owners, but they were allowed to go out and catch shad for their own meals. Terrible to think about slavery, but fascinating to think about these things and how this plays into history. Hard to talk about. And then on a more practical note, I really enjoyed how they talked about how shad's eyes are really sensitive to light and why, which explains a lot about some of their migration and their hurdles to migration, particularly here on the East Coast, Northeast, where they hardly exist anymore. So lots of interesting points, lots of history. I'm a more practical guy, I like practical things, but it was good to get into, and now I'm going to go out and fish for shad in a week. All right, take care, nerds.
Jeff, it's gonna make you crazy in about 2 weeks when the shad run starts here in New Hampshire, and I start sending you photos every day of shad.
I was so absorbed with salmon and steelhead and trout when I lived in Washington, which they get a big run up the Columbia.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't even on my radar. It was all about the salmon, all about the steelhead, all about the trout. And I could have been in the largest shad run on the planet, completely off my radar.
Yep, shad heaven, yeah. So this book kind of starts out, and when you first get into it, it's all about fishing for shad on the Delaware. That's the opening.
Yeah.
And it immediately, reading it reminded me that as all my times working on the river with shad, I did not fish for them nearly enough. I've caught them, but I didn't really dig into it. And I wish I had been motivated more when I lived right next door to the shad runs to get into it. But reading it makes you really, really want to fish for these fish. Is that your takeaway?
Oh, yeah. And they're a spectacular game fish. I guess pound for pound, it's one of the fightingest fish you're going to hook into. And also good to eat, which, I've never had especially smoked shad is a delicacy, which is something that kind of evolved over time. Like Rich was saying, early on, it was considered either slave food or poor people food. And, it wasn't considered a delicacy, but as time has gone on, it has turned out to be, very highly esteemed, not only as a sport fish, but as a food fish. And the other interesting thing is that when you're fishing for shad, they're not feeding.
No.
And so you're basically getting reaction strikes. Something gets in the fish's face. It doesn't like what it sees. Something about your lure bothers it. And the only way a fish can do anything about it is go bite it.
Right. And that's the case. That's the case with lots of with migratory fish that are on the way to their spawning grounds. They're not. They've already gorged themselves in the ocean. In their job now, get to the spawning grounds, and make babies. So
that's exactly
just don't
right.
eat. Yeah. And with this, now, by the way, I found John McPhee to be very wordy. I think this book could have been half the length, and been just as good. But that's my opinion. And I was listening. I read part of it, and then I had to grab the audiobook to kind of get further through it. And I still didn't finish the whole thing. I got about 90% done this afternoon. But what I liked about it was the back and forth from his actual fishing experience to the history, both natural history and history of the United States with that fish and how it impacted American history. I really loved hearing the impacts of shad on the Revolutionary War. And then really, being from New England, we all think salmon were once abundant in New England. Learning that salmon were not abundant because they did all these studies on bones, digging up bones of fish and finding out what lived here, and they didn't find salmon. Which is
in fact, that a lot of what people might have been calling salmon were actually shad. They just said, well, it's an anadromous fish coming up the river. It must be some kind of salmon. I think maybe they called it white salmon.
That's right.
If if I remember exactly right, the wording in the book. But yeah, and the other thing that I think this book covers, yeah, it's different than the first book. You don't get the sense from Cod that Mark Kurlansky has ever gone out and fished for cod.
No, the love of the fishing didn't exist in the Kurlansky book.
No, he's
sure.
purely interested in it as a, as a food, as a resource, of, the management issues and things like that, the history. But you don't get a sense that Mark Kurlansky has ever fished for cod. Whereas if you take this book to be an accurate depiction of John McPhee, I'd say the guy's kind of a shad maniac.
Yeah, shad nerd.
Yeah, he's a shad nerd. And so, he's writing, like you said, it alternates back and forth between his experiences, his fishing, his friends, the relationships he's built while fishing for shad, and then the history. And there's the whole debate about whether it was actually an early shad run that saved them at Valley Forge, that they were starving.
Well, let's talk about that, because I thought that was my favorite part of the whole book. So in Valley Forge, it was an especially harsh winter. And George Washington was trying to lead, the military, the army, and winter was dragging on and on and on. They were out of food and clothing. They do a great job describing early bureaucracy, where George Washington wrote some 30,000 letters,
yeah,
like requesting supplies, and then so the oral history is the shad run showed up. Everyone feasted on shad, and they were strong and healthy and ready to win the Revolutionary War, right? But then the book takes that and it goes for the science. Is there evidence that shad run really saved the day? So go ahead.
The science is pretty conclusive that it didn't happen.
Spoiler.
That way.
Well,
yeah.
and it was fascinating because there are people whose job it is to dig through the trash of these old camps and find the bones, and then do DNA studies on the bone to find out what people have been eating. And it turns out, in that case, it was not shad. It wasn't fish, even. They found one shad bone in the whole mess of bones. They didn't find deer or rabbit either, which I thought was also interesting, because they were ignoring the local natural food.
They may have eaten that all. That stuff probably didn't last very long once the whole army showed up and didn't really have much to eat. I have to imagine that the surrounding countryside became rapidly depleted of basically anything you could eat.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I imagine it would do that. They did everything. But it's funny, if you flash back to the McPhee book, the cod book, you would think cod was being imported to all these war sites. But I didn't see that either in this. Like, it felt like two different stories at the same time period.
Yeah.
The cod one was Civil War, wasn't it?
Well, yeah, and the cod was a sea fishery, and I have to imagine that naval operations during the Revolutionary War probably made it difficult to go out and. I'm sure the British probably said, "Well, we'll keep them from eating cod."
Well, they probably shut down the cod grounds.
Yeah, we'll just go camp out on the cod grounds with some warships, and there you go.
Right now, there
supposition.
And now there were accounts of the British dragging nets across some mouse rivers to keep the shad run from happening.
Right,
to try and starve out the troops.
Yep, yeah, deny them their food source, and an army travels on its stomach, and so the attempt to cut off the shad flow.
Yeah.
Although I don't think they were ever very successful at it.
Well, those rivers are so big. What both books had in common was rum.
Yes.
Lots of rum was drunk. So there's that,
Yeah, and I just find the whole concept of the anadromous fish as sort of, again, they're one of those canaries in a coal mine type things. Kind of that you can kind of measure the health of a say like a watershed if it has anadromous fish in it by how successful those are. And we've done a lot to make things hostile to anadromous fish.
We have, and the biggest thing though isn't pollution; it's dams.
Yes, dams are a major problem.
Yeah, it is the biggest hurdle, so to speak, for them to deal with.
Yeah, and he devotes a whole chapter to, or maybe more, to the removal of a dam.
I don't think I got that far.
Yeah, and he actually goes and after they remove the dam, he and a friend go canoe the section of the river that was now exposed back down to its natural state. Well, as natural as it can be. Obviously, there've been lots of siltation and things like that, but they're like, we're going to be the first people down this newly restored river after they removed a dam. And yeah, that's a big deal with shad on the East Coast, anadromous fish on the West Coast, the steelhead, the salmon runs, majorly impacted by dams, especially on the Columbia and Snake system.
Well, it's really all of them. In New Hampshire now, we've been removing dams. We just took out a dam in Exeter, New Hampshire, where Dave Kellum, former fish nerd, lives, and he put photos up today of that river running free. So this year will be the first year that herring and shad can run that river unimpeded, at least for the first, I forget how many miles it is, but they can essentially get to their spawning grounds without a fish ladder, which will be really fun to see how they do. But it's remarkable how fast rivers come back after you take a dam out. It's really proving to be worth getting rid of the dams. Yeah,
and that's a major battle that's going on out west. I know that having lived out there, the debate over the dams on the Columbia River, and especially there's 4 dams on the Snake River that are just basically useless. They generate some electricity, but not a lot. And they've cut off just thousands of miles of potential spawning habitat. And there are a lot of people who'd like to see those go. Ironically, the shad found a new home on the West Coast. And actually, if you really want to see huge numbers of shad, that's where you need to go.
Really?
Is go out. Yeah. There are huge runs in San Francisco Bay area, most of the Oregon coastal rivers, and there's an absolutely
is that the same?
Run.
Is that the same shad?
It's the same shad.
Alasso sabidissima?
The delicious fish.
Yeah.
The somebody in the 1800s, and forgive me, I can't remember the name from the book, but transported fertilized shad eggs across the United States, and I believe dumped them into the San Francisco Bay.
Oh, hey, fun fact: to transport live shad, your truck, your tank has to be circular.
Yeah, because they'll bang into the wall.
They'll just bang into the wall until they die. Yeah.
It's the same way with gizzard shad. Yeah,
in the springtime every year in New Hampshire, you can watch the shad mobiles drive up and down the Merrimack River with truckloads of shad, dump them up and down the streams. So.
Yeah, but the shad spawning requirement isn't as exacting as, say, salmon or steelhead.
True.
And so while the salmon and steelhead on the West Coast have really dwindled, shad have really, really exploded in population. And so the world's largest shad run runs up the Columbia River, and it dwarfs anything on the East Coast.
That's amazing, because I've seen some big shad runs on the East Coast. I'm amazed by that concept. Now, people focus heavily on the salmon run still because salmon is the public fish. It's the fish that attracts funding and dollars. New Hampshire canceled their Atlantic salmon program 3 years ago. So we no longer are working towards restoration of the Atlantic salmon. But we are focused heavily now on the herring and shad and sea lamprey runs. And the public's starting to come along with us finally to see the value in these fish and see how cool they are, which is kind of neat to see.
Yeah. Anadromous fish are amazing. Their ability to just essentially change body chemistry from that transition to salt water to fresh water. It's an amazing strategy. You go out to the ocean, that's where all the food is, but then you come back to these streams where you can have where you can reproduce, where your young will be protected from the harsh world of the ocean where things get eaten. Yeah, somewhat, but just a few percentage points makes a difference.
It sure does.
And so that strategy of go to sea to get big, come back to spawn, it's cropped up quite a few times in different fish lineages. And it's evolutionarily very interesting.
Right. If you can call evolutionary a genius activity, it's that.
Yeah.
It's really a great adaptation. Now, so we only have a minute more on this discussion, but what's the biggest takeaway from this book? What are you bringing home from this?
Well, for me, really, I think what drew me to it and what I like about it is just his love of the fishing.
Yeah, the joy.
He just derives an immense amount of joy from both catching and eating shad. He is not a pure catch and release fisherman. He is eating those shad, and he loves this fish. He loves this fishery. He'll fish for other things, but it's shad that's what's on his mind most of the time, and that's fish nerd behavior.
It totally is. And he actually he compared the amount of hours shad fishing with what like a pilot would spend learning to fly.
Right. Yeah.
That level of nerdiness. And my big takeaway on this is I want to catch a shad and I want to butterfly it and I want to nail it to a piece of oak rudder and smoke it over a fire.
Yes, absolutely.
I'm going to give you the recipe. This is the recipe. You got to find an old oak rudder.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then you catch a shad, a big one, butterfly it, which means split down the middle, nail it to that board, and then rub it in oil and salt and pepper. That's it. And then put it over the fire, but not over the heat, just over the smoke until it's cooked through. And that's it. And that's apparently delicious. And I've not done it that way. And if I get a shad this year, that's exactly what I'm going to do.
Yeah, so now...
Except not the rudder.
Right. Yeah, you might have to look around for a little bit for the old oak rudder.
He said in that one town that became so popular that people were stealing rudders off of boats.
The boats.
I don't believe that for a second, but I believe that to be the story,
fisherman's tales.
Yeah, exactly. So anyway, that's The Founding Fish. If you've read the book and you want to revisit this conversation, we're on Goodreads. You also can join us on Facebook for this conversation, or you can call the Fish Nerds hotline, 607-378-FISH, and we can always revisit this conversation if you want to add to it or you want to get your voice heard. We always play all of our listeners' voices. We try to get them on the show as much as possible. So, wow. So that's great. And again, I didn't finish the book. I'm going to finish it. I'm driving to South Carolina in 2 days. And
that's audiobook. That's audiobook time.
It's audiobook time, and I'm going to get through it. I actually felt like it was 3 different books. So it could have been broken up. Yeah. Like a how to catch shad book, like how and why, and the history of the United States and shad, and then a cookbook. So yeah. But so next up, we are going to talk about what's next for the FN Book Club. Now, this is only our second FN Book Club, and we've already been on the radar of major publishing houses. So
I know we've hit the big time.
So I got it. This actually happened this afternoon. I'm not exaggerating. Like at 3:00 this afternoon, I think I emailed you right away. Simon & Schuster called me up and said, "Hey, Clay, we have a new book. Can we send you some copies? And can you talk about it on your show?" And I thought, yes. So
absolutely.
Yeah. So the book we're going to be talking about next month is by John Garrick. And you've heard of John before, right?
Oh, yeah. I've read several of his books.
Yeah, most of us have. And he's written for a bunch of magazines, other publications. They call him the voice of the common angler and member of the Fly Fishing Hall of Fame. He brings his sharp sense of humor and keen eye for observation to the fishing life, and for that matter, life in general. The book is called A Fly Rod of Your Own. It's just came out April 4th, so it's fresh and new. You can get it on Amazon or wherever your books are found. Or are they in libraries yet, do you think?
They should be soon.
They should be soon.
Yeah, the libraries lag just a little bit behind what gets on bookshelf. On bookshelf. Let me spit this out. Bookstore shelves, and that's largely because the way that the library vendor process works, it just runs a little bit behind. So, but they should be showing up real soon. Yeah, I'm gonna read you the description of the book. Garrick once again takes us into his world and scrutinizes the art of fly fishing, which I'm happy to see scrutinizing happening of arts like this. He travels to remote fishing locations where the airport is not much bigger than a garage
and a flight might be held up because a passenger is running late. He sings the praises of the skilled pilots who fly to remote fishing lodges in tricky locations and bad weather. He explains why even the most veteran fisherman seems to muff his cast whenever he's filmed or photographed. He describes the all but impassable roads that fishermen always seem to encounter at the best fishing spots, and why fishermen discuss four-wheel drive vehicles almost as passionately and frequently as they discuss rods and flies. And there's a bunch more, but we are actually in talks with getting John on the show as well. So this is a good one to get the book and read it and give your thoughts. Simon & Schuster's paying attention, and they are. I said I'd like to interview John, and they are trying to work that out for us. And we're going to be giving a book away, and I'm not sure how to do that yet, but Jeff and I will come up with a plan, and we will give a copy away. Jeff's getting a copy for himself. I'm also getting one, and I'm going to give my copy away after I'm done reading it. So we'll have 2 copies at least to give away.
Yeah,
so
definitely I will donate mine to the cause.
So we'll give 3 copies of this book away after the next FN Book Club, which will happen sometime in May. I don't have a date yet for it because we get very, very busy coming up here. Jeff, I know as the show is starting to really get full of ideas coming up. So I actually have an interview, another new correspondent. She went fishing with a person who chartered fished with Martin Luther King, and she interviewed that person. That's coming up on future shows. We've got all kinds of correspondents around the world making stories for us. I'm going to South Carolina. I'm also going to the Virginia Aquarium in a month to judge their seafood festival and do some speaking gigs down there. Can't believe I'm flying to Virginia Beach on their dime, which is amazing.
And you're going to be speaking at a brewery?
Speaking at a brewery, and
yes.
I'll plug this. So the Virginia Aquarium and Marine Science Center has asked me to come down and judge their Sustainable Seafood Festival in May, at the end of May, last week of May, the week right before Memorial Day, and so they're flying me down. They're putting me in a big fancy pants hotel. And I'm going to present to their people down there. And then I'm doing an in-store appearance at a Whole Foods, which is crazy. And then at a brewery who brews beer just for the aquarium. It's for the sustainable fish. So I'm going to do that. And then I'm doing some like lunch and learn sessions where I'm going to be doing some work with their biologist on fishy communications and stuff like that. And then I'm judging the seafood festival, which is going to be amazing. I'll put links up at fishnerds.com. But basically, all the restaurants at Virginia Beach have gone to focus on making seafood sustainable. And I'm going to be judging it. And the goal this year is no waste. So no paper plates, no plastic cups, no garbage. That's the goal. So it'd be amazing what people come up with.
Yeah, and the looking for underutilized fish species that are just everywhere.
Like gizzard shad.
Yeah, I don't know about the gizzard shad. I am going to go on a quest to catch the silver and bighead carp around here. And supposedly pretty good eating. And so you may hear something from me about that in the future. This is kind of a future project I've got brewing. But yeah, it's an invasive species here. They're everywhere. They're much like shad. They're plankton feeders, so they can be tricky to catch. But I'm going to figure out how to do it, and then I'm going to eat it, and I will report back on those results.
Yeah, you should. Now, are those the ones that jump out of the water when the boats drive past them?
Yes, they do.
So you can bow hunt. You can bow hunt for them, right?
Yes, and in fact, I believe in Peoria, there's a group of guys that go out on water skis with like samurai swords.
I've seen those videos.
Yeah, and they even have a game called scarping where they ride on wakeboards, I think, and they've got an inner tube between them with a basketball goal in it, and they go with nets and they catch the carp in the air, and you get a point by dumping the carp through the basketball net into the tube.
Yeah, and I have such mixed feelings about all that stuff. You know, on one hand, it looks really fun. I can see why you get into it. On the other hand, it's not nice.
I would prefer that those fish get eaten. I do understand that they're a seriously invasive species, and they they have the potential to really disrupt the food chain.
Absolutely. But if you look at the history, why were they brought to the United States to begin with?
They were put in aquaculture ponds and they got out.
Is that the case? So I know with the common carp, they were brought here as food fish.
Yeah. Actually, the silver carp and the bighead carp were put into fish farm ponds because they basically clean them up. And there was a flood. They ended up in, and I believe this was in Arkansas. Mm-hmm. And then they ended up into the Mississippi, Missouri River system. And since then, I have seen just in the time that I've been back here in Missouri, I've seen the explosion happen to where occasionally you'd see one to now. There's at certain times they will congregate. And it's like in the passage of the book Cod where they said, well, you could walk across the backs of them. Mm-hmm. That's pretty close to what it's like sometimes when these silver carp and bighead carp in certain places.
Well, I say catch them and eat them. If they're good to eat, you should totally be eating them, unless they're full of mercury or something. So
no, that's the good thing about them is they're primarily plankton feeders, so they're not bioaccumulating.
Oh, so go for it. Oh, I can't wait to hear a report on that one.
Yeah, and I'm going to make it double hard by trying to do it by fly fishing for them. So
why not? Just put a piece of plankton on a tenkara rod and you go nuts. See what you're doing.
Well, tenkara rod means broken rod. With that, we're gonna be using we're gonna start out with like a saltwater fly rod.
Get a tenkara broomstick.
Yeah, well, I've got a Japanese carp rod, which is designed, it's much like a tenkara rod in that you just tie the line to the end, but it's much, much sturdier. And so we'll start out with the saltwater fly rod trying to catch these things. And then if I'm successful with that, then we'll move on to the fixed line rod. But we'll start out with the saltwater fly rod.
Oh, fantastic. Can't wait. Hey, how about some fish in the news?
I love Fish in the News. This is my favorite Fish Nerds segment. I've always loved it. That's why I'm always sending you stories.
Yeah, and I use them. And how about our new theme song for the Fish in the News? You like that?
I did like that.
Yeah, that was by Diana's Bath Salts. It's a local band up here, the third best band on Town Hall Road.
News, fish in the news. Everybody loves their fish in the news.
So first story we have is not about fish. A genetic oddity may give octopuses and squids their smarts. And this is in the New York Times. I love when the New York Times does stories about, the oceans. It's fantastic. Coleoid cephalopods, a group encompassing octopuses, squid, and cuttlefish, are the most intelligent invertebrates. Octopuses can open jars, squids communicate with their own Morse code, and cuttlefish start learning to identify prey when they're just embryos. In fact, coleoids are the only animal lineage that has really achieved behavioral sophistication other than vertebrates, said Joshua Rosenthal, a senior scientist at Marine Biological Laboratory in Woods Hole, Massachusetts. The sophistication could be related to a quirk on how their genes work. According to a new research from Dr. Rosenthal, a biophysicist at Tel Aviv University, I keep saying names here, in the Journal of Cell on Thursday. There's a journal called Cell. It's the most boring name ever. The scientists,
academic journals are like that.
I know. The scientists reported that octopuses and squid and cuttlefish make extensive use of RNA editing, a genetic process thought to have little functional significance in most other animals, to diversify proteins in their nervous system, and natural selection seems to have favored RNA editing in coleoids, even though it potentially slows the DNA-based evolution, blah, blah, blah. So this goes on for a long time. But then they found that coleoids have tens of thousands of so-called recoding sites where RNA editing results in a protein different from what is initially encoded by the DNA. When they applied the same methods to the two less sophisticated mollusks, a nautilus and a sea slug, they found that the RNA editing levels were ordered in a magnitude lower. So they did a little experiment comparing the sea slugs, like other invertebrates, with these octopuses, and they just found that it didn't work out the same. The RNA was different in these guys. Researchers compared the RNA recording sites between the octopuses, squid, and cuttlefish and found that they share tens of thousands of sites to varying degrees. By comparison, humans and mice share only about 40 recording sites. So these were very similar animals in a lot of way. I love looking at how smart octopuses are.
They're amazingly smart.
They're really cool.
And that's why they make terrible aquarium pets.
Because they escape?
They will find a way out of your aquarium.
Have you had them in an aquarium?
A friend has had saltwater aquariums, yeah, and you just don't even... You need to think like you have Houdini in the water, because they will find a way out. And unfortunately, sometimes they don't find a way back in, and then you find dried octopus on your floor that probably cost you a lot of money. And so, yeah, they're very, very clever.
Yeah. Now, a couple weeks ago on the show, we talked about how some don't eat octopus because of how smart they are. How do you feel about that?
Well, I eat bacon, and pigs are really smart.
Yeah, that's the case we made.
Yeah, I just don't want to get to know the pig, right? It's like, please don't make me feel too attached to this pig, because that's where bacon comes from.
It's delicious.
Yes, it's delicious. Maybe there's a correlation between how smart something is and how good it tastes. I believe that babies don't taste good, according to the podcast. So
that's what Zoe said, yeah.
That's right.
Because they're not smart.
yeah. So they're not smart, so they don't taste good. But yeah, it's an ethical question about eating things that are smart. I think a lot of us would probably draw the line at something like a great ape.
You would, yeah. Bleeding heart liberal. Now, now it's interesting because Hugo, our food correspondent, has been eating octopus like every day this week.
Oh, I've eaten it too. I really like it. It's good.
I've never had octopus I like to eat, and so I'm in the camp where we just don't bother. But I know I guess if it's sustainable and it's in good numbers, go for it. I'm not going to do it. So, and not because they're smart either, but that might have a little bit to do with it. It might play a role. Like I don't eat reptiles very often either, and it might be because I just really like them a lot too. And I like fish.
Yeah, if I didn't eat things I liked, I'd be hard up because I really like fish.
Yeah, I like fish too, but it's a different kind of liking. I don't know what it is. Like I'm not into eating frogs and salamanders, but fish I really like everything about them, including eating them, and I can't make a good case for it. Now I'm discussing it out loud. Maybe I should give up food entirely.
Yeah, well, at some point I want to get around to in the book club of being a major devil's advocate, stir the pot. The book, I believe it's called "Do Fish Feel Pain?"
Oh,
which I think makes is arguing that we shouldn't catch and eat fish because they do feel pain.
I've corresponded with the author of that book, and I'd love to get him on the show. He hasn't answered those emails back. He's emailed me about why we should not eat him, but he's not responded to, "Hey, you want to come on the show and share your story?"
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting. I want to know more. I don't want to. I used to be a scientist. I used to be a chemist. That's why this article was so fascinating to me, because I worked in kind of the intersection of organic chemistry and biochemistry, but especially involving DNA and RNA and stuff like that. And this article about the octopuses and the RNA editing is really fascinating. Because they've taken a completely different approach to adaptation than most other animals. They're doing it on the fly. They're literally, as the animal is there in the environment, editing this stuff. But I know about confirmation bias, which is you only want to believe what reinforces your already existing beliefs.
Which is normal. Like that's human behavior.
Yeah, I really think we should read that book, if nothing else, to understand where the other side is coming from. Yeah,
well, it's funny because I deal with I have a local protester, and I try to empathize, and I'm not talking to her anymore because she's compared me to a child kidnapper, but I try to empathize. Like, if you really believe these things are true, then let's have that conversation and see where you're coming from. It'd be really nice to understand it. So I'd love to get that guy on the show if he'd answer my emails. But like I said, but so far what I'm hearing is people want to say their point and don't want debate. And by the way, if I did have him on the show, I wouldn't argue with him. I just listen and let
Yeah.
him
I'd
tell
like to
his
hear
story.
the case.
Yeah,
Yeah.
make your
And that's
case.
why I'd like to do the book.
Yeah, let's do it. Put it on the list, and we'll get him on the show. Well,
It's already on the list.
excellent, excellent. Hey, did you know youthful poo makes aged fish live longer?
That's a therapy. I'm getting older, but that's a therapy I don't think I want to try.
I heard this on NPR a few years ago that like there's actually a thing where humans are doing poop transplants.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know about that.
Yeah.
That's, yeah.
Have you when you did it last? Tell me about how it was.
What, a poop
Yeah.
transplant?
How was your poop transplant?
I haven't had one, but I know about
Now
them.
my question is, do they remove the peanuts first?
And the corn.
And the corn. Nah, you went there. This is from Scientific American. Even they are doing stories on poop, so don't blame the fish nerds. It may not be the most appetizing way to extend life, but researchers have shown for the first time that older fish live longer after they consumed microbes from the poo of younger fish. The findings were posted to the biorxiv.org preprint server on March 27th. This is good news. So-called young blood experiments that join the circulatory systems of two rats, one young and the other older, found that the factors coursing through the veins of younger ones can improve the health and longevity of older animals. But the new first-of-its-kind study examined the effects of transplanting gut microbes on longevity. This is very exciting news. So basically, poop is the fountain of life.
Yeah, that's essentially what the human fecal transplant is that somebody's lost their gut biome and need a new one, and there's an easy way to do that. And so I guess the fish are basically kind of DIYing it.
They are. Now, they did the study on killifish, which, by the way, is a whole family of top minnows. There's not just one species of killifish. But this article says, life is fleeting for killifish, one of the shortest-lived vertebrates on Earth. I did not know that. The fish hits its sexual maturity at 3 weeks old, just like me, and dies within a few months. That's a short lifespan. That's why I can't catch them. The turquoise killifish that they studied in the lab inhibits the ephemeral. What is that word? Ephemeral.
Thank
you. Ponds. I'm glad you're literate. That formed during the rainy seasons in Zimbabwe. Previous studies have hinted at a link between the microbiome and aging in a range of animals. As they age, humans and mice tend to lose some of the diversity of their microbiomes, develop a more uniform community of gut microbes, with once rare pathogenic species rising to dominate in older individuals. So they're saying, like, as you get older, the diversity goes away, and that diversity limits your ability to fight off diseases, and you end up with like this imbalance, which makes you sick. The same patterns hold true for killifish, but it makes sense to study a short-lived fish just like that, because with them dying so fast. Now, some killifish, by the way,
you get results fast.
Yeah. Now, some killifish live for a long time. If you look at like, I can visualize the killifish. It went to the moon. What's the fish that went to the moon?
Is it the mummy chog?
The mummy chog went to the moon. Now, that's in the killifish family. That's still a top minnow. They live a lot longer. They can burrow in the mud and they can hibernate and deal with hot weather. But I guess this species is very short.
Yeah, there are some that are very adapted to living in these transient pools. I know this from having been in the aquarium hobby at one time. And they don't live very long. They can be just gorgeous, amazingly beautiful fish that live 3 months and die. And literally if you want them, they ship you the eggs that are just like on some damp moss.
Some
and
life
you
support.
Throw it in an aquarium and you get these beautiful fish, and then they die in 3 months.
That's the perfect pet for kids. I'm going to tell you why. Because kids focus on animals, on pets, is 3 months long.
Yeah.
So if you get them a pet that dies in 3 months, you get all the joy of a pet without the long-term, now I'm dad, I got to take care of your fish for you, right? It's perfect.
Yeah, I see a business opportunity here.
Every kid needs a killifish. That's the new thing. Mail order killifish. Yep.
Mail order killifish.
Yep. 3 months.
It's the new sea monkeys.
It is. Oh, you know what we can do? We can do like one of those like monthly book clubs or whatever, like, you know, the mystery tackle box model. Every 3 months you get a box with an animal that's going to die in 3 months.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this week it might be
of killifish are you getting this week?
right.
This
Oh
month?
yeah, the green killifish, and the next week might be the banded killifish, and the week after, something else that dies fast, and then the kids get to learn about life and death and life cycles without all the boredom of an animal that lives like 12 years, like a dog.
Right.
It's perfect.
Where they begged and said they'd take care of the dog. Oh, I'll do everything. I'll take care of the dog. And a few days later, you're taking care of the dog.
Exactly. My daughter just got a bearded dragon, which she's very proud of. But every morning I'm making salad for the bearded dragon, and I'm handing it mealworms, and I'm doing all the care. So it's already happening. She loves it, but I do the work. But back to the story real quick. I'm going to wrap this up. The microbes get transplanted into the guts of the killifish. A 60-week-old fish, if it's given young killifish microbiomes, it actually starts resembling a 6-week-old fish. So it really is a fountain of youth. It really is working. So that's cool. It also boosts their immune system, right?
Right. Yeah, that's actually the whole logic behind probiotic foods for people.
It is. Now, have you ever met anyone on a probiotic diet?
I can't say anybody that's strictly probiotic.
So anyway, don't do it. There's no joy in that life anymore.
All yogurt.
I like sauerkraut.
I do too, and kimchi.
I've never had kimchi.
It's spicy Scott.
Well, I do like it. Now, do you know? Have you ever lit up a pickle? Yeah, so you can do sauerkraut too. So you just take two wires, split them, put some nails on them, stick them in the sauerkraut, plug it in the wall, and it lights right up. It's amazing. Just as fun as pickles. All right, so that's fish in the news. We got to move forward. We're running out of time today. We have a really important special announcement from Doc Martin. She called in this afternoon, and she just wants to talk about her big, exciting publication. She's been published. And now Doc Martin's been with the show for 3 years, since the very beginning, before she was the doc. She was just a gypsy fish biologist or something. And now she's a big-time professor in Kansas, and she's been published. And here's Doc Martin.
Hi, Fish Nerd Nation. This is Doc Martin. I don't have any super cool, awesome fish facts or anything like that for you today. I just wanted to let you guys know about something really exciting that I wanted to share with you guys. I officially signed a contract this week, like less than 24 hours ago, for a laboratory manual. So who cares? There's lots of those, right? Since you guys have been so diligently listening to me and all my shenanigans and geekery for the past several years, if you've been some of the first listeners, I thought I wanted to make my very first official announcement about this project to the Fish Nerd Nation. So I worked with my co-author. Her name is Whitney Davidson. And we have created this lab manual that is novel. So this type of thing currently does not exist in the world. We looked online and books, and we contacted multiple sources across the U.S. for a similar product, and we couldn't find anything. And so what we have done is we've made a laboratory manual for students that have severe visual impairments or total vision loss. So when I worked at my university, when I first started, I had some students come in that were blind, and I didn't know what to do because I was brand new faculty. I've never had to deal with this before. And when I tried to find resources to adapt labs, like using microscopes and biodiversity and animal behavior, I learned quickly that there's just nothing out there, which kind of surprised me. It's 2017, I mean, how is this not available? And so Whitney, who's my co-author and my very good friend, we were chit-chatting, and I was kind of airing my grievances, if you will, and we hatched this idea. So we just kind of started working on writing up and adapting the the modules on very common things that you have done in general biology labs and make that accessible to students with visual impairments. And the coolest thing about this is that all students within a laboratory class can complete the laboratory exercises in the same classroom setting and with the same expectations regarding academic conduct, regardless of their vision. So you can have a class with, students that have no vision loss or students that have total vision loss or a mixture of those. And the way that this is written is so all students can learn the same concepts and do the same things, which I think is really exciting. And I always stand by I think it's right. Science is for everybody. Every single person, if they have the motivation to do science, can do it. You can learn about it. You can read about it. You can do it. It's not this, ivory tower nebulous cloud of fancy things. It's something that every single person can learn. And if you don't want to be a scientist, then every single person can learn to appreciate and understand science. And that's kind of where this whole project came from, and I'm very excited to announce that I have signed official contract with the American Printing House for the Blind to complete this project by the end of this year. Then in 2018, I'll go into field testing, and I'll get comments back from teachers all around the United States, and hopefully in maybe 2019, it will be on shelves and widely available throughout the U.S., which sounds crazy when I say that out loud. So anyway, that is all from me. Just a short little snippet to keep you updated on all the crazy things that Doc Martin does. And I will catch you all on the flip side with some fish facts. Thanks. Bye.
Congratulations, Doc. We look forward to you sticking with us, even though you are a big-time winner. So, yeah.
Everything.
It is.
So congratulations.
And maybe if she gets a book published, we will have her in the FN Book Club, and we'll know her when she was just Martin.
We will.
Regular
we will know
Martin.
when she was just the Doc.
Yep.
When she was just our Doc Martin.
Regular old Doc Martin. Next up, Andrew Lewin from Speak Up with the F and Blue is going to join us and talk a little bit more fishy conservation. We've been working this segment into the show the last few weeks to try to get our fish nerds to get more into the conservation mode. And since we don't do conservation talking as well as Andrew does, we thought we'd partner with the Speak Up for the Blue podcast. You can get that anywhere podcasts are found. Jeff, you're a fan of the show before you were part of the show.
Yeah.
Are you enjoying the transition of the show and where it's going right now? Do you like this?
I really like the emphasis on the conservation because, if we love fish and we love fishing, then we should care about the system that provides us with this. Whether it's the marine environments, the river environments, the lake environments, a healthy ecosystem is, it's good for fishing. It's just good for us in general. It's good for the health of the entire planet. And so I'm really glad that, we've had, and I know for some time on this podcast, you've pushed the sustainable seafood movement, and, you've learned some lessons.
Oh, we get it wrong sometimes. It's okay to be wrong.
You got it wrong.
Yep.
Yeah. You got called out on the Mako. And,
it's going to be hard because we're giving away another fishing trip with Captain Sean. And so we have to figure
for something besides a Mako shark.
Yeah, it's going to have to be something different. I don't know what to do.
I really like the emphasis on the conservation and the sustainability, and I think the climate change is a huge thing that we're all going to have to deal with, and I think it's going to affect fisheries tremendously.
Well, I think fisheries affected probably first. That water temperature is so important to fish, and it matters. So.
Yeah, if you fish for cold water fish species like trout and things like that, the idea of everything warming up does not.
No, it's a nightmare. Yeah. So anyway, so this is Speak Up for the Blue. And if you haven't subscribed to the Speak Up for the Blue podcast and you want a podcast that really focuses on ocean conservation, even though it's Canadian, we like them.
So, yeah, and I've subscribed to it, and I listen to it, and I really enjoy it.
Yeah, and of course, and they're happy to have us as part of their community, and we're glad we're friends with them. So check it out.
Hey everybody, Andrew Lewin back again with your ocean news update here on the Speak Up for FN Blue segment here on the Fish News podcast. I'm glad to be back again. Clay, thanks for inviting me back. We're going to talk about 3 stories today, 3 kind of quick ones, I guess, or 2 longer, 1 quick one. But essentially what we're going to talk about is we're going to talk about how bears are getting affected by climate change in their hunting skills. We're also going to talk about how fish are tracked using their DNA, a really cool new method of sampling fish. And we're also going to talk about a shrimp named after Pink Floyd. Yes, that's right. Shrimp named after Pink Floyd. I'll tell you the story behind that. All here on the Speak Up for FN Blue segment on the Fish Nerds podcast. Let's get started. So we're going to start off with polar bears because that's up in my way, up in Canada. In the north, of course, in Hudson Bay. There was a study conducted about polar bears in the way they hunt and how climate change is actually affecting the way they hunt. Now, polar bears, as what you might know, I'm not sure if you know the effect that polar bears are feeling, but I did a podcast last year with Thea Beshoff, who is a PhD, Dr. Thea Beshoff. She did a podcast with me on how bears are affected not only by climate change but by pollutants in the air. And this and if you want to hear the podcast, by all means you can go ahead, speakupforblue.com/session 251, or just go on your podcast app and look for for episode 251. It's a really great podcast. But in this one, this article that I'm looking at in the Independent out of the UK, they talk about some of the PCBs that have been found as pollutants that are weakening the male's penis bones. I'm quoting that directly from the article, to the point where they can actually snap off. That is disgusting, and that's gotta hurt. So polar bears are feeling the effects of climate change, and most times when we talk about climate change, we talk about lack of sea ice, because polar bears are a marine mammal. They spend more than 60% of their time in the ocean, and they use sea ice, whether it be icebergs or just ice drifts. They use them to rest after they swam for 700 kilometers or however far they're going. I think the longest they've actually clocked a polar bear in the water is going for 700 kilometers. But in this case, they're looking at winds and wind speed. So apparently, polar bears actually smell seals, their food, their natural prey, using light winds. So they'll actually walk into a wind, they'll take a couple of sniffs, and then they'll be able to smell the seal. I guess they have that type of odor. And then they'll go and track those seals. Now, what researchers are worried about is climate change is supposed to increase that speed, that wind speed up in the Arctic. And this is up Hudson's Bay, so northern Ontario area, near Nunavut, and the territory. So what they're worried about is that if the wind has to be just right. If it's too soft, then they won't be able to smell anything. The wind won't carry the smell of the seal. If it's too strong, the wind the smell will just bypass the polar bear. It won't be able to pick it up. So what they're worried about, that the wind has to be at just the right speeds. In this article that I'm reading, it doesn't say the exact speed, but the wind has to be just the right speed for the polar bear to smell the seal. Now, I kind of think about it as smelling wine. If you have to have a good palate to smell the different components of a wine, and that's exactly what these polar bears are doing, but they depend on wind speed to smell the different components of the seal and what's good and what's not. And what this leads to is it leads to another hardship that the polar bears will have to face. It is predicted that due to climate change, a third of the polar bears will be wiped out in 40 years. That's across the entire Arctic, their entire range. Now, of course, that's an estimate. If we do better with climate change, maybe that will be better in the future. But essentially what's happening, you've got the lack of sea ice, you've got pollutants like PCBs that are snapping these poor things' penises off, and you've got winds that will increase and they won't be able to find food as easily as they have been before. This is not saying that they can't adapt to it, to higher winds, but a lot of them already, they're an endangered species. A lot of them will die because they won't be able to find food, or they'll drown because they can't rest on sea ice. So polar bears are in a little bit of trouble. This is just another article showing how they're in trouble. It's good to know this information so that we can understand how polar bears hunt, how polar bears feed, and how they survive and how they need to survive. And we're going to see how they do in the future, hopefully with climate change getting better and better. But at this point, the way governments are going with putting in pipelines and bringing back coal, and I'm talking about Canada and the U.S., it just doesn't seem like this is going to happen. And Canada boasts one of the highest populations of polar bears, especially in the Hudson's Bay area. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. Hopefully, we don't lose a third of the polar bears in 40 years. But it looks like it's going to be that way with all the problems they're having. Anyway, off on that note, let's move to the next story, which is fish that are being tracked using DNA, quote unquote, fin prints left in the waters of New York. So normally when scientists measure fish to determine their population, their size, and all this kind of stuff about fish populations, and which has to do with like a lot of different things: presence, absence. You're looking at whether they're there or not. You're looking at how whether it's good for a fishery. You want to make sure you're not overfishing, you're not underfishing, all that kind of stuff. We usually use nets to gather the fish. Sometimes we put a little jolt of electricity if you're in the rivers, in an electrofisher to actually get them to shock them to come to the top, which doesn't harm the fish. If you just do a little shock, and then you can take your samples from there. But now there is a new way of getting fish or determining whether fish have been there or not, and it's the use of DNA. And so what's happening is when a fish is in a specific area, whether it be a river, a lake, or an ocean, it leaves stuff behind, and it could be just excrements from the fish itself. It could be slime from the fins. It could be cells that get scraped if they're scraping on a rock or on whatever it is that they're scraping on. And what happens is that leaves DNA in the water. So instead of sampling a fish, which could oftentimes be fatal to the fish, you sample with a bucket of water. And you take that sample. It costs $50 to process the sample. And then once you process the sample, you know what fish has been in that water, or what fish DNA has been in that water. And what I love about this is it saves researchers a hell of a lot of money. Two, it allows citizen science projects to be done very easily. If you take a number of samples along a river at different points, say citizen science do, and they bag it and tag it, that water, and then they send it to the lab to be processed, you can have a really good idea of what fish are in, or what fish DNA is in every river stream, or every river, lake, and maybe even coastal ocean. So it's really easy to do the sampling. $50 is a little expensive to do the processing if you have too many, but at least you can get a good feel for what's in the water, and it's still relatively cheap. Now, if you think about it, to do a trawl to sample fish, you have to rent a boat, which could be $5,000 to $10,000 a day just to sample. So that's what we're looking at a lot of times for fish. So from a scientific methods area, you're looking at a very good way of sampling. Now, it does come with its setbacks in terms of there was the Nile. This study was from Reuters, and or this article is from Reuters, and they talked about sampling the East River. And they noticed that there was, one of the problems with this sampling is they noticed there was DNA from the Nile tilapia. And they're like, well, how is the Nile tilapia in New York? It's just impossible because there are no Nile tilapia in New York that have been found. And what the researchers are thinking is that that's coming from excrements from humans, from eating the Nile tilapia. and then it just going through the sewer system and it being picked up in the water. Now that's kind of gross in one way. The other way, it's kind of interesting to see what kind of DNA is flowing through the East River and other rivers. It makes you think of what happens. That not all that stuff gets picked up in the sewage treatment plants, and that so some other DNA can get in. I know for a fact that this is a great method. So it does come with some drawbacks, but it is a great methodology to find out if there are invasive species in the area. To find out if they've been present or absent in a water body. So if you find their DNA, you're like, okay, hold on a second. There could be Asian carp in an area. There could be some people have used it for frogs in wetlands. As in I think it was in Paris or in France, where a bunch of specific frogs, species of frogs that were being used in a farm for the frog's legs delicacy, got out and into a wetland and has become invasive. The American bullfrog is the species I was looking for, and it's damaging local wildlife after it escaped from farms. So they're trying to track them down, and they use DNA in wetlands to determine whether they've been present or absent within a specific wetland, which is great to know. If you think about it, it's great to know, because just because you don't see a specific species, whether it be invasive or not, in an area, doesn't mean they haven't been there. And the DNA allows us to think that they've been there, or kind of pinpoints where they've been. So that's a really good way of detecting. Want to share that with you because I think it's fun to share science stuff. Plus, it has to do with fish for you fish nerds, us fish nerds, I should say. And I think it's kind of an interesting way of sampling. So I'd love to know what you think. Let Clay know in his Facebook group, because I think it's a cool thing to talk about. Now the last story is kind of a fun story that I found on NPR. It's a shrimp that kills with its sound, and it's named after Pink Floyd. And this has nothing to do with if you love or hate Pink Floyd and you think their music is garbage, which I don't know who would, because Pink Floyd is probably one of the best bands and has one of the best followings in the world. But this little guy, this shrimp, is kind of cool. He's named after Pink Floyd. He's kind of like a pistol shrimp. In a pistol shrimp, what they do is they open up their claws really slowly, and then they snap it so fast that it makes a really loud noise, like a pistol. And it can shock the fish around it or its prey around it, whether it be other shrimp or fish. I think it is carnivorous, and allows it to jump on them and kill it and eat it. This shrimp, however, has a little bit more power. So the Latin name, forgive me if I don't pronounce the first part right, is Synalpheus pinkfloydi. Okay, Synalpheus pinkfloydi. So you can tell why it's named after Pink Floyd. And it can crack its big pink claw at 210 decibels, which is louder than a typical rock concert and loud enough to kill the small fish nearby. So it can actually kill fish, not just stun it. It can actually kill fish. Now, this story, it turns out that the reason why this shrimp is named after Pink Floyd, because the researchers at the Oxford, I believe it's the Oxford University Museum of Natural History, Dr. Sammy DeGrave, he's the one who named it. He named it because the shrimp claw is pink, and it goes by a story that when Pink Floyd came over to the U.S., it's a UK band. When Pink Floyd came over to the U.S., the reporters thought that the band members were named Pink, or one of them was named Pink. So one reporter asked, which one of you is Pink? And of course, that was a bit of a joke. And they actually put it into one of their songs, "Have a Cigar," and one of the references, the line, "By the way, which one of you is Pink?" is the line from "Have a Cigar," the song. So that's how it was named by. But a lot of people thought it was named after Pink Floyd because there was a concert that Pink Floyd put on. I think it was I forget which concert it was part of. But during the concert, they lit up like this massive octopus in a lake, and what do you call it? There was dry ice. So it looked like kind of like it came out of nowhere, and the music was so loud during the concert that all the fish died in the lake, or that's what they initially thought. So they thought at first the shrimp was named after that, but apparently Dr. Sammy DeGrave had no idea of that story. But it's kind of interesting that's what happened. But eventually, people thought that, maybe the dry ice that was dumped into the lake, as well as the explosions that went on to light up or to start the blowing up the said octopus that were in the bottom of the lake, maybe that killed the fish, but they don't know. But anyway, it's kind of a cool story because this fish is named after Pink Floyd, and the name. I'll read it one more time. The name is Synalphus pink floydii, and it can kill fish with its loud claw, opening and closing. It's kind of like, I guess it's a type of pistol shrimp, which is what I told you before. And then there's another species of fish. They're not the only. It's not the only species that was named after a band. There was another fish that DeGrave and his colleagues have named. It's a species of shrimp, actually, named Elephantus jagerae, after the Rolling Stones frontman Mick Jagger. So there's a big influence in rock music in naming shrimp species, especially coming out of the UK. What is it? The Oxford University Museum of Natural History. So I thought that was an interesting article to share on that. But anyway, that is the end of your conservation news update from the Speak Up for FN Blue segment. I'm your host, Andrew Lewin. I really appreciate you guys listening to this. I hope these are fun articles to share. Hope you guys get a lot out of it. Let Clay know if you do, and I will do more and more. And thank you very much, Clay, for allowing me to be on the Fish Nerds podcast. It is absolutely a treat for me to do this, and I love doing it. So have a great rest of the podcast, guys. Enjoy your episode, and I'll chat with you later. Happy conservation.
So that you've listened to a couple of fish nerds, a whole bunch of fish nerds, when you definitely should have been fishing.
We'd like to thank our families and everyone else in our life, for that matter, for supporting us while we podcast, go on fishing quests, and do all sorts of silly things that nerds do. If you'd like to support the Fish Nerds, you can go to patreon.com and search for Fish Nerds and help us crowdfund this podcast.
Hey, special thanks to Jeff Danaldson. Jeff, how can people find you?
Facebook mainly. I am not a Twitter guy. The Twitter has descended into a morass of terribleness, and I've left it. I'm on Facebook.
But you can find you on the Fish Nerds podcast group. You're very active in that.
Yes, I'm very active there, and if you get in touch with me there, I can hook you up with my Instagram. Guess what? Lots of pictures of fish. And those are really the two main social media I do. I'm on Goodreads as well. And you can even go to the website of the library I work for, and I've accumulated some reading lists there too.
Fantastic. And special thanks to Diana's Bath Salts for the new jingle. And special, really big thanks to Nick of the Bath Salts for mixing the podcast for us. Andrew Lewin from Speak Up for the Blue podcast. Thank you. And Doc Martin, nice job.
Yeah, good job. Great job. And until next time, follow the code of the Fish Nerds. Spawn early and often.
Avoid free lunches with strings attached.
And swim against the current every chance you get.